scary.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to Dee. Are you there, Dee? She's coming. Coming. So I have an she's on another Zoom. So I have an off the record question. I kind of dabble in various environmental things. And there is supposed to be some testimony taken by BOEM about opening up some more lease area for offshore wind. And the last thing I found from your organization was there some questions about the right whale and, certainly ship strikes and fishing tackle. And I think that was back in 2022. Do you know if there's a more recent statement, or who might I contact? Or
it's a good question. Yeah, I used to do a lot of offshore wind stuff when I was at Delaware, but I don't do it as much anymore. We have like a whole renewable energy team. I'm just not sure. Do you remember who that statement was from?
I think most of you guys have been here before, so I'm going to ask Dee to introduce herself in a sec. But Green Drinks is based on a bunch of Brits who got together over beers and talked about environmental stuff. So we followed their quote rules. We're supposed to meet at a bar, but since COVID happened, we've been meeting on Zoom, which works out well for those of you who come from downstate, which is way cool. So we thank our partners who are the Delaware Sierra Club, the Citizens Climate Lobby, Plastic Free Delaware, Delaware Native Plant Society, who you guys with the Delaware Nature Society, I think you just gave the Delaware Native Plant Society some money to do a garden variety. Interfaith Power and Light, DIVA, and Peggy's Crowd Power. Do you want to say something about yourself? And you have some events coming up too?
We do. Thanks, Jill. I'll put a link in the chat to our website. We've got a bunch of stuff coming up, which is fun. Hope to see some of you at various things, including Wednesday night at Wilmington Brew Works, at least for those of you in the northern part. And then we have a webinar on Thursday at noon with the author of a book called A Year of No Waste, where she tried to actually generate no waste for an entire year with her family, which it's a humorous take on a very serious subject, but she's a lot of fun. And I think you might enjoy it if you're able to join us on Thursday. So
fabulous. And I salute you for your selection of the Wilmington Brew Works. It's a super fun place with good beers. So drum roll. Kathy Harris is our speaker, and she's the senior advocate for clean vehicles and fuels at the Nature Resources Defense Council, if I can say that. A Delawarean, as we all know, who we just heard went to Wilmington Charter, has a degree from the University of Delaware. And I'll find this where I wrote it, in environmental science, and then an MA in marine science. She recently worked for our favorite place, DNREC, as the Clean Cities Coordinator and Clean Transportation Planner for 4+ years, and now has graduated to working out of New York with Natural Resources Defense Council. So drum roll, Kathy, take it away.
Thanks, Jill. And hi, everyone. It's so good to see folks that I have worked with in the past, and also some new faces too. And I love all the conversation about offshore wind. One of the things that I did not put in my bio, but I went to grad school at the University of Delaware to study offshore wind with Dr. Willett Kempton, who I'm sure many of you know. Willett as you might know, also is an expert in electric vehicles, and he, in his wonderful ways, looped me into some electric vehicle projects, which is actually how I got to where I am today. So I have a love, and my start was in offshore wind, but have transitioned to focusing on transportation now. So a little bit of a funny pathway of how I got to working in the transportation space, but owe it all to Willett, another Delawarean. So as Jill said, today I'm going to talk about clean transportation, and specifically the transition to zero emission vehicles. So I have a presentation of like 25-ish slides that I figured I could run through, kind of talking about not only like why transportation electrification is really important as we talk about climate, air quality, and health, but specifically a regulation that I know has been a hot button item here in Delaware, the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy, which is something that the state is considering, which will help accelerate the transition to zero emission vehicles. So there's going to be a lot of kind of background as to how we prepare for this transition, but we'll also focus in a little bit on that specific policy, and then want to leave plenty of time for questions at the end as well. But I'm hoping I can preemptively answer many of the questions in the presentation. But yeah, Jill, I don't know, it probably makes sense to do the full presentation and then answer questions, if that makes sense.
All right, that's okay. That sounds good.
Great. And then if there's any like clarifying questions or anything, though, please let me know. Let me just make sure I can share my screen. See if this will work. Okay. And then let me do PowerPoint presentation, start the slideshow. Oops, sorry. There we go. Can you see that?
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So as Jill said in her wonderful introduction, my name is Kathy Harris. I'm a senior advocate of clean vehicles and fuels for the Natural Resources Defense Council. And so I wanted to help us level set a little bit here before we dive into electrification of vehicles, which is why transportation sector matters. And these two graphs really highlight the importance of why, when we're talking about reducing climate harming pollution and improving air quality, the transportation sector is a really key part of that. In previous decades, electricity sectors and energy and industry sectors have been really high polluters, but over the course of the past couple of decades, the transportation sector has increasingly become the largest piece of the pie when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions in the United States and in Delaware as well. And then when we focus in even more on that, we see that passenger cars and light trucks that are on our roads take up the majority of that transportation slice of the pie. So when we're talking about wanting to fully reduce greenhouse gas emissions, tackling this transportation sector is a key strategy to helping reduce our overall greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the ways that we can do that is through promoting zero emission vehicles. But we also, in that transition to creating vehicles that have zero tailpipe emissions, we also want to help to switch to non-vehicle modes of transportation when possible and reduce vehicle miles traveled and reduce the number of cars that necessarily need to be on the road, and reduce gasoline and diesel vehicle emissions that are currently on the road through tailpipe pollution, fuel efficiency standards, switching opportunities for vehicles for Delawareans and for others to not have to rely on cars through transit, pedestrian bike lanes, etc. And then for all of the remaining cars that are on the road, we want to make sure that those are electric and zero tailpipe emissions, being powered by clean electricity. So this is kind of like the whole strategy of reducing that slice of the pie of transportation, is not only just a transition to zero emission vehicles, but cleaning up the gasoline and diesel cars that are going to be on the road, unfortunately for a while still, just with the lifespans of vehicles on the road, but also having those opportunities for other transit opportunities and bike pedestrian opportunities, and then electrifying the vehicles that are left. And so when we talk about supporting electric vehicles, this is a big reason why when we think about alternative fuels. This is an example from New York. I should have pulled one from Delaware, but this is where I live right now is in New York City. But I wanted to and we'll see similar, if you were to pull these up for Delaware, very similar results in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions. But as we can see, even today, with where the current electric grid mix is, because unlike a gasoline vehicle where you are, refueling your car with oil or diesel, electric vehicles utilize electricity from the grid to power. So in terms of a full life cycle or a full recharging system, an electric vehicle is as clean as the grid that is using to fuel that vehicle is. So, we have a lot of natural gas and a lot of nuclear and other things on our systems currently, but even with a high percentage of natural gas, we still see that there is significant greenhouse gas emissions reductions today from you charging an electric vehicle compared to driving a gasoline vehicle as well. And I highlight this too because electric vehicles are one of the only fuel sources or fuel types that will actually get cleaner over time as we increase the number of renewable energies on our system. And if you have solar panels in your house, you really are creating a fully zero emission vehicle because you are not releasing any tailpipe emissions nor producing any greenhouse gases in the production of that electricity to charge your vehicle. So we'll continue to see these gaps in this delta of emissions increase as we add more renewables onto the grid. But just wanted to highlight that this is one of the reasons why we talk about electricity as a fuel source being so important in this transition to cleaning up the transportation sector and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions as a country and as a state. I also just like to throw in this slide too, just to highlight that electric vehicles over the past couple of years have really become into the consciousness of society. It feels like a little bit more than they had in the past, with lots of new models and lots of new commercials and all that kind of stuff. But I always like to highlight that electric vehicles are not new. Actually, the first electric vehicle was invented in the mid-19th century. They had a land speed record up until approximately 1900. So this technology has been around really since the invention of the car. And then the picture on the right there is a vehicle called the EV1, which was something that GM had put out in, I want to say the late 80s, early 90s. It was a very cult favorite car for a lot of folks. And there's a whole entire documentary about this vehicle called Who Killed the Electric Car. It's amazing. Highly recommend it. It really gives the history of what happened with that vehicle and the industry at that time. And then they followed up with a sequel several years later, really once like Tesla and the Nissan Leaf were coming on board, called Revenge of the Electric Car. So if anyone's ever in the mood for a movie night, highly recommend those two documentaries. They're really fascinating. But so far I've talked a lot about the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. When we're talking about this transition to cleaner vehicles, an important thing to note is that this is not just carbon that we're talking about as well. Or just we're not talking about just carbon. The transportation sector is also a huge polluter of nitrogen oxides and particulate matters. And these emissions are also important for us to think about as we're doing these transitions because these particular pollutants are particularly harmful for human health and for air quality. So we see a lot of the NOx and the particulate matter pollution coming from the truck sector. In particular, it still is very prevalent in the light duty vehicle passenger car sector as well. But we see most of those emissions coming from nitrogen oxides and particulate matter, which is why at NRDC we focus not only on light duty electrification, but we also work to help to electrify our trucks and buses on the roads too. My expertise is on the cars side of the house, so you'll see me focusing on that today. But as an organization, we do also focus on this sector too, to make sure that we are doing the most to reduce these emissions and improving human health. But I wanted to highlight just a little bit more discreetly about what some of these health effects are from gasoline and diesel. So in addition to the greenhouse gas emissions, the health and air quality is really affected by the nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, particulate pollution, sulfur dioxide, all of these things that are coming out of our tailpipes, both in our cars and our trucks. And they have really negative effects on human health. It includes things like lung cancer, premature death, heart attacks, and stroke. There's a lot of things that happen to our system when we breathe in these pollutants. So as we transition to vehicles that release zero tailpipe emissions, we're ultimately helping to reduce these negative health and air quality effects. And this is discreetly shown in the American Lung Association has this amazing report called Zeroing In on Healthy Air that was released last year. And they really highlight the potential benefits of a transition to 100% zero emission vehicles, specifically on health pieces. So we can see, and air quality. So we can see that there's significant reductions in nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, fine particulate matter, significant reductions. And I love this report because they really do highlight what that means on the human level. So not only are we seeing these reductions in emissions, but we're preventing over 2.78 million asthma attacks, a huge amount of premature deaths avoided, and also lost work days. So highly recommend checking out the report. There's a lot of really great information. And I believe that report also has some state-by-state statistics as well. They also release every year a State of the Air report for each individual state, which also has a ton of really wonderful information on air quality. And they know they have a whole scorecard on Delaware too. So American Lung Association has some incredible information that I'd encourage you all to check out. But in addition to all of those air quality and health benefits, there's also significant economic benefits too. This slide I love to show because this is showing the discrepancy in prices between gasoline prices versus electricity prices. And we know that right now we are reliant on the state of the gasoline market as it is. And as we can see in this chart, since 2001 alone, we've seen high spikes, high peaks, high valleys of the prices of gasoline. But during that same time period, the price of electricity has remained almost stable, which is very minor peaks and valleys comparatively to the gasoline prices. And this is really important because even today, we know that electric vehicles are cheaper to own and operate than a comparable gasoline vehicle. And that's important because transportation is one of the highest energy burdens of households in the United States. And part of it is because people can't plan for how much it's going to cost for them to get to work every day because of the volatility of gasoline prices. So having a stable electric price for your fuel, it's better to help people plan and also helps reduce that overall fueling cost for drivers. And since electric vehicles have fewer moving parts than their gasoline counterparts, there's also less maintenance and there's less things that are easier to break in the vehicle as well, which helps to overall reduce the overall cost of ownership of those vehicles too. So with highlighting all of the benefits of zero emission vehicles, I wanted to now kind of get into the crux of the presentation, talking about how does this transition occur? We can see that there's all these benefits and we need to move in this positive direction, but how do we actually get there? And we think of it in kind of a three-prong approach, which is we have to make sure that there's a vehicle supply available, that there are vehicles for people to purchase. And we do that through standards that are going to be in place that will help for auto manufacturers to produce more electric vehicles and hold strong to their commitments that they've made on this transition already. Then we also want to make sure there's a robust charging network available. So, we are transitioning from the gas station model to using charging stations. And we need to make sure that there's a robust network in place to make sure people feel as though they can travel where they need to get to without the fear of running out of charge. And then finally is making sure that there's a demand for electric vehicles. So once we have the vehicles available to purchase, we have a robust charging infrastructure network. We need to also make sure that these vehicles are available for people to purchase and that there is an understanding from the general public about how to use these vehicles, what their benefits, etc. These all, I should note, these don't need to happen in this order. These all are things that we are working on concurrently, and they can all happen at the same time. But these are kind of the three main buckets that we see as really important to this transition. So I wanted to start with that foundation of the vehicle emission standards. And this is where this Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy comes into play. So I wanted to give a little bit of background on that policy and why it's really important. But essentially, under the Clean Air Act at the federal government, California is allowed to set standards that are more stringent or more aggressive than the federal government's. There's a long history as to why that was available, but essentially the short story is California had their own version of an EPA before the EPA was even created, and they had already been regulating some tailpipe emissions. And so when EPA's Clean Air Act was created, they were grandfathered into that rule to be able to create more stringent standards. And so this program has been around for many, many years, but it's called the Advanced Clean Cars policy as kind of like a bucket. It was this specific version of the rule was first adopted in 2012 and really focuses on three main components. One is producing low emission vehicles for criteria pollutants, so like those NOx and particulate matter pollutions. And this has a goal of by 2025, cars will emit 75% less smog pollutants. There's also a low emission vehicle rule for greenhouse gas emissions as well, which will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. And then there is the portion called the Zero Emission Vehicle Program, which is what we've been hearing the most about under Advanced Clean Cars 2, which does require manufacturers to sell an increasing number of zero emission vehicles. And we define zero emission vehicles in this case as battery electric vehicles like the Nissan Leaf, hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles, and then plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which are like the Prius Prime or the Chevy Volt, which is no longer around, but those types of vehicles where you need to actually use a charger to recharge the battery. So this rule, as I said, has been around since 2012-ish, and this was the original iteration of the program. This program was a little bit more convoluted and wonky, but essentially it meant there was these percentage of credits that needed to be sold. So we see 22% by model year 2025. That actually equates to really like 7 or 8% sales of electric vehicles by 2025. If the 22% is like of credits and vehicles could get up to 4 credits, it's really complicated. So the 22% is more like 7 or 8% sales requirements. But if anyone's been keeping track of the news recently, I think it's been a lot of articles and conversations about how the United States is actually at around 8% sales already today in model year 23, 24 at this point. So when California was looking to update these standards, they were looking at the state of the market and saw that we had significantly surpassed the goals of the program already a couple of years early. And I'll talk a little bit about automaker commitments in a little bit, but also taking a look at what the state of the market is, not only here in the United States and what automakers have announced in terms of a transition to cleaner vehicles, but also the global state of the market as well. California realized that they could go further, and we need to go further to help to really reduce the emissions from this sector. So in 2022, they adopted the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy, which I highlight here. And this chart, as you see, goes from model year 2026 at 35% to 100% new vehicle sales by 2035. And I highlight the new portion of it because this does not affect any used vehicles on the road. It does not affect any vehicles that are currently on the road at all. It's all about new sales, and it's a regulation on the automakers themselves. So there's no requirement on states to adopt this or drivers to purchase these vehicles. It's really the point of regulation is the dealerships. And it's also important to note about the new piece as well, because one of the reasons why it's important for this transition of new vehicle sales to happen by 2035 is because we know that vehicles can stay on the road for a very long time. I think it was Sharon who said, you have your vehicle for 19 years now, and that, we know that vehicles can last on the road for that long of time. And so as we're thinking about, wanting to zero out pollution from the transportation sector, which is, again, a huge slice of our climate emissions pie or climate harming emissions pie, the sooner we can transition the new vehicle market to zero emission vehicles, the sooner all of our vehicles on our road will transition to zero emission vehicles. And it's also important too to flag that in the US, only about 25% of drivers purchase their vehicles new. So this seems like a huge number, but really we're talking about, like 25% of the new vehicles or the vehicles sold that year being electric in the whole scheme of Delaware sales, for example. And the sooner we can transition the new vehicles, the sooner those vehicles will enter the secondary market and be available for more drivers within the state to be able to purchase these vehicles. Now I know that, we talked about the like 7 to 8% sales from Clean Cars One. And if you've been following any of the news in Delaware, you might know that Delaware does not currently have the first iteration of that ZEV requirement. So that slide that I just showed, Delaware has not participated in the ZEV component yet. And so I know when California was developing this regulation, which under the Clean Air Act, I should clarify, other states are allowed to either adopt the California more stronger standards or just automatically adopt the federal standards, which are weaker. And so when California was developing the rule, they understood that other states might not be at the same level of sales sales available as California is, which California is now, I think, at 25% of new vehicle sales being electric. So they are way past the Advanced Clean Cars One policy. But so when they were considering this regulation, they incorporated a bunch of different vehicle values or flexibilities within the rule that help to provide opportunities for states who might not be at as high of a level of sales as California is by including these flexibilities in the rule. So this is a graph that I really love to highlight, which is the dotted line is actually what we're expecting a real world requirement might be under these flexibilities. And so the orange bars here are really indicating, what the vehicle values or the flexibilities in the rule, how they kind of lower that actual real world requirement on the automakers to achieve their requirements. So the green bars are almost like the gap of what we're expecting. And I should note that the blue bars that we see here, this is not specific to Delaware. This is just an example of a potential state, but a lot of the blue bar is really taken from this business as usual, which comes from some projections from the federal government as to where we're anticipating vehicle sales will be naturally, even without these requirements. So as I said, we're about at 8 or 9% sales right now. So this is pretty accurate. This was created last year. So we're not too far off from this 10% that was projected as the business as usual in model year 2023. And we still have several more months to go for 2023. So who knows, we might actually achieve that business as usual is ready. So I just like to highlight this slide because, I know we hear 35% new vehicle sales, and that can be a very scary number. But when we look at what the current business as usual is for electric vehicles in the United States already, and then see these flexibilities on paper, it's not as large of a gap as it might seem initially. So I just like to highlight that. And so, as I mentioned, California adopted this rule in 2022, but by no means is California the only state that has adopted these regulations thus far. This map shows those states that have adopted Advanced Clean Cars One and those that now have adopted or are moving forward with adoption of Advanced Clean Cars Two. So you can see that Delaware and Pennsylvania right now are the only two states that adopted the tailpipe emission portions of those standards previously, so the criteria and the greenhouse gas emission standards, but they did not adopt Advanced Clean Cars One. Delaware is in the process right now of adopting Advanced Clean Cars Two. I know there was a comment period and a hearing on the rule. So I think there's a wait of a final decision on that. But you can see that there's, Delaware is in good company of other states that are also considering moving forward with these rules this year. I'm actually heading to Colorado on Wednesday. There's a hearing in Colorado about these regulations. New Mexico is adopting. New Jersey has their comment period on this coast. You know, the Maryland was the most recent adoptee of this regulation. There's been a total of 8 different states thus far, including California, that have adopted the rule. So Delaware is by no means on an island considering these regulations, and as part of a very good company of folks who are thinking about moving forward with this transition to zero emission vehicles. So I've talked a lot about the state stuff because I really do feel like the Advancing Cars 2 policy is really crucial and critical to helping with this transition to zero emission vehicles, and is really the only way to guarantee that auto manufacturers will bring those clean cars to the state. But I did also just want to highlight that there is a lot happening at the federal level right now as well. The Biden administration has a goal of 50% new electric vehicle sales by 2030. You may have heard of the CAFE standards, which is developed by the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration. They produce fuel economy standards, which helps to make gasoline vehicles more efficient on our roads. So that's kind of hitting that top of that bucket that I mentioned at the beginning of making sure that our gasoline and diesel vehicles that are going to be driving are as clean as possible. And then the Environmental Protection Agency also has greenhouse gas standards that they're currently in the process of developing. I should just note that the EPA standards, they are just tailpipe emission standards. So there are no requirements on zero emission vehicle placement or creation under those rules. They're really focused just on the tailpipe emission pieces of the fleet as well. So a lot's happening at both the federal and the state level in this transition, which is really exciting to see. So with all of that kind of foundation setting in terms of the vehicles themselves, I wanted to start quickly highlighting about charging infrastructure as well. So I like to call it solving the chicken and the egg problem, where historically, there hasn't been a lot of charging infrastructure because there hasn't been a lot of vehicles, but there hasn't been a lot of vehicles because there hasn't been a lot of charging infrastructure. So I think we are finally getting over that crux, which I'll talk a little bit about now. But charging infrastructure is really important. I like to think about the fact that having an electric vehicle is a different mentality than having a gas car. We've been so conditioned over, the past 100 years that when you need to refuel your car, you have to go to a gas station, you have to fill up within a couple minutes, and then you're on your way. But you still have to go to a gas station. With electric vehicles, if you have access to charging at your home or at your work or at where you're traveling or your destination, it's almost like having a gasoline station like in your garage, because vehicles sit idle for 80-90% of the time and are really only utilized when we need them to operate, which is, considering all of the hours of the day, on a typical day, a very small amount of time. So it's a little bit of a different mentality in how we refuel these vehicles, but it's really important though to make sure that we are ensuring that there's a robust network of charging infrastructure so that people can feel comfortable and confident that they'll be able to refuel their cars and not run out of fuel when they're driving out and about. So I like to just highlight really quickly the different types of charging stations that are available. There's 3 main types. We have level 1 charging, which is actually literally just like an outlet in your home. It's the same type of outlet that you use to charge your cell phone or your computer, a 120 volt outlet. Those are very slow charging, so it takes a very long time, but you can utilize it. It comes right now. They currently come with the vehicles too, so it would take a very long time. So they're more recommended for vehicles with smaller batteries, like plug-in hybrids, or if you're going to be sitting for a long time, like a couple of days or a day or so. That's when that's most ideal. But level 2 charging is probably the most popular, especially for when we're thinking about charging at home or at workplaces. It's a little bit faster. It utilizes the same plug as a washing machine or dryer, the 240 volt outlet. So, many folks already have that capacity in their homes. And that's why it's ideal for residential garages, workplaces, and destinations where you don't need a charge within 10 minutes, but you might need within an hour or two to refuel that battery, or overnight as well to get you a full charge. That's where level 2 is really ideal. And then the third type is called DC fast charging. Now, these are like huge pieces of equipment. They're very expensive. So this is, and they're a huge amount of power. So not something that anyone should or could ever really install in their homes. This is really placed for when people are driving en route. So this is more of like the gas station model. So when somebody needs to recharge their battery very quickly, you would see a DC fast charger. So on highways, if there's like a community charger for a downtown area for people who might not have access to home charging, that's where we really see the DC fast chargers come into play. But so I wanted to highlight kind of where the state of the infrastructure is here in Delaware. So Delaware has 173 locations already with charging infrastructure. This is the Alternative Fuels Data Center station locator. They update all of the public charging stations available within states across the country. So I love to check out this resource. This is including both those DC fast chargers and those level 2 chargers. So there's lots of resources available to figure out where charging infrastructure is when you're traveling. And I know a lot of cars are increasingly having maps to direct folks to these chargers as well. But we're really starting to build out this robust network in Delaware. And so, but there is still more to go. And one of the ways that we've been seeing across the country of this expansion of charging infrastructure is actually from support from utilities. So a lot of utilities around the country have started to help really with the back end of the charging infrastructure. So making sure that there's conduit in place, that the transformers are ready, that we call like behind the meter pieces to help with this transition and help reduce costs of the site host to be able to install these chargers. So we've seen that utilities around the country have already invested $4.8 billion. And you can see in this chart here, Delaware's here as well. There's about just over $500,000 that's been dedicated from Delmarva to help support charging infrastructure in Delaware as well. But this is something that utilities across the country are starting to figure out and starting to discuss opportunities to engage in this space. And so the chart on the right here is what I was talking about, where we've seen a lot of those investments on the utility side of the meter. So working to make sure utility distribution networks are in place. There's transformers, helping with trenching and construction, which can be a significant cost for charging infrastructure development, but also thinking about rate design as well. So not utility policy can get really complicated and really wonky, but there's opportunities for utilities to set rates for charging at different times of nights, for like off-peak hours, utilizing those things. So in addition to thinking about the support for the infrastructure itself, utilities are also thinking about ways to integrate these vehicles onto the grid properly. And so the chart on the left here is really highlighting that utilities with the largest amount of electric vehicles on the road, these have over 1 million electric vehicles in these service territories, have seen that, even though they've been putting some upfront costs in terms of helping with this transition, it's not causing an increase in rates, or we actually also haven't seen any harm to the grid thus far. What we're actually seeing is that the revenues associated with charging of electric vehicles and with this transition is actually significantly higher than the cost of utility support in the space, which ultimately has been pushing downward pressure on rates for all utility customers. So as we're adding more electric vehicles to the grid, and the electric vehicles are utilizing charging, particularly in off-peak hours or when there's excess energy on the grid, we've actually seen that benefits not only electric vehicle drivers, but drivers or all utility customers throughout those service territories as well. So that's another thing that utilities are thinking about in terms of helping support. I also should just highlight that the federal government has also been helping with this infrastructure support investment. Last year, the Senate passed a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, and a huge portion of that, this is the IIJA, which I'm blanking on the acronym right now. It's been too long of a day, but it's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which has created a significant amount of money to help to build out a robust network of charging station infrastructure throughout the United States. Delaware is receiving money on that front. So in addition to this federal government support, which is helping states build out the charging network, we're also seeing additional utility investments as well. And just to tie it back to Advanced Clean Cars 2 that I mentioned, when states adopt that policy, it also sends a strong signal to the market that this Delaware is committed to zero emission vehicles and will help bring in private investments as well to help build out that charging network. And so last but not least, in that kind of bucket of how we help with this transition, I wanted to highlight the increasing electric vehicle demand. And I always like to start by showing that automakers, this is not, as I alluded to, not just something that states or the federal government has come up with out of nowhere. We've been seeing huge amounts of announcements from almost every single major automaker about a goal or a target of this transition towards zero emission vehicles. And so what these policies that we're working on, and like the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy is doing, is it's really just helping to accelerate that transition and holding automakers to these commitments that they've already made publicly on this acceleration towards zero emission vehicles, and helps a phased approach so that we can make sure that we are planning when we know that the future is coming, but we can phase this in over time and have a planned approach towards this transition. And from the federal government, in addition to the IIJA announcement, there was also the Inflation Reduction Act that also got announced last year as well. So I highlight that there because there's a lot of support, as I mentioned, in terms of helping to reduce the upfront costs of electric vehicles too. So as I highlighted, electric vehicles are cheaper to own and operate than gasoline vehicles. The upfront cost of an electric vehicle can be higher than a comparable gasoline vehicle at this moment. But under the federal support, there is, under the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a new process for the federal tax credits. So you can now receive up to $7,500 off of the price of an electric vehicle, which has been policy for a while, but one of the important things that has changed under the Inflation Reduction Act is that now drivers do no longer have to have a $7,500 tax obligation to be able to receive that benefit. And in fact, dealerships can actually take on that burden and give the drivers that rebate at point of sale as well. So you can automatically see that benefit. And I also like to highlight too, I think that we don't talk about this enough. In IRA, there is also a benefit for used electric vehicles too, up to $4,000 as well. So that's really going to help to, again, hopefully stimulate the secondary electric vehicle market and help get those vehicles into the hands of more drivers too. And I would also be remiss not to mention Delaware also has a rebate program for electric vehicles too, which Tom, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's $2,500 now. So $2,500 plus the up to $7,500, you're really seeing a significant potential upfront cost off of the price of that electric vehicle, which then helps for drivers to realize those fuel and maintenance savings even sooner. And then also an important piece, I know there has been some chat about the battery recycling portion, and under the Inflation Reduction Act, there's actually been a significant amount of incentives to help bring a lot of the battery supply chain and recycling pieces here into the United States. So battery recycling is a huge component of that, and trying to help develop a circular economy here in the United States. So there's been tons of announcements coming out around that, and we're anticipating more to help repurpose the minerals that we see that are currently in batteries. And so far, since the Inflation Reduction Act, we've seen over $210 billion of announcements of the electric vehicle manufacturing here in the United States as well. So again, just reiterating that the car industry is seeing that this is the future, and they're making significant investments here in the US, and we're going to continue to see those increase over time. And so then, I also just wanted to highlight that in addition to the automaker announcements and increasing in terms of their commitments and their vehicle sales, we're also seeing states, increase and drivers see increased interest as well. So the chart on the left here, I just pulled, it's from the Auto Alliance that represents a lot of the major auto manufacturers. And this is from Delaware, actually, this annual sales. So we've seen that, over time, sales of electric vehicles have been exponentially increasing within the state. So in 2022, we saw an $800 or an 800 car increase over year. So we're seeing an increased amount of these vehicles being sold constantly, and it shows no signs of slowing down. And then the chart on the right is that national sales. So again, this is not just a Delaware specific increase. We're seeing this across the whole entire country too, of more and more drivers realizing these benefits and realizing the options available for them in terms of electric vehicles. And I'll highlight too that we're also seeing more makes and models of these vehicles available as well. So it's no longer just the Nissan Leafs of the world or just the Chevy Bolts of the world. There's the Ford F-150 Lightning, we have pickup trucks, there's SUVs, there are minivans available. So really whatever is the need for drivers, auto manufacturers are increasingly creating electric versions of their most popular makes and models. And we're seeing there's a real desire for drivers to purchase these vehicles. And so last but not least, I wanted to leave us, I talked a lot about really where we're at and a lot of positive momentum, but did just want to highlight, there still is more to be done as we do this transition, but it is a transition and all of these things don't need to be determined overnight. And as I said, with these policies that we have in place, like Advanced Clean Cars 2, hopefully, it's really helping for folks to think about these what else needs to be done and opportunities to plan for the future and to make sure that we are creating a robust network and robust infrastructure system, both in terms of charging infrastructure, but just as like the vehicle market as a whole as we transition here. So I highlighted a couple of pieces of things that we're still continuing to work on, but we're seeing this transition occur. It's really, frankly, a really exciting time to be in this space. There's a lot of really positive momentum, and it's really quite exciting to see so many positive steps forward. And I think I've been talking for quite a long time, so I'm going to end it here. And here's my email address if there's any additional questions that we can't get to today, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. That is fabulous. Do we want to just, can you just read from the chat some of the questions, Kathy? Is that an easier thing to do? And then we'll ask people to raise their hands and go that way. How's that for a plan?
Yeah, that sounds great. So I think the only question I see is from Trish on the recycling of the batteries. So as I mentioned, under the Inflation Reduction Act, there are a lot of incentives to help create new battery recycling facilities within the United States. There's one in particular called Redwood Materials. They have partnered, I think it's with Ford already, to help with that battery supply chain, and they have like a huge evaluation, and they've already been starting these processes. So the Inflation Reduction Act is really going to help to stimulate more and more of that battery recycling here in the United States. And as I mentioned, some companies are already taking advantage of that. And I should also note that in addition to the battery recycling, there's also a lot of efforts to help to consider different battery technologies as well, to make sure that we're also thinking of things like solid state batteries or batteries that utilize less minerals too, so that we're having to extract less things from the ground. So there's a lot of things moving in this battery space as opportunities to help reduce the impact of the new battery creation, like battery recycling, like different technologies as well. So yeah, lots that's still happening in that space, but even over the past year since the Inflation Reduction Act has come out, there's been a lot more announcements about this. Yes, and John, exactly. There's lots of reuse of batteries too. Batteries, in addition to recycling, can be opportunities. They didn't really talk about this, but for like grid storage as well. So bring up Willett again. One of the things Dr. Kempton at the University of Delaware has been working on for many years is vehicle to grid technology. So utilizing vehicles from batteries in cars as a storage unit, essentially for utilities to be able to put excess energy onto the vehicle's battery when there's excess offshore wind, for example, and then being able to pool that excess energy out when there's less of when there's a higher peak demand, for example. So, there's stationary options for that. There's options for vehicles to be utilizing that as in the kind of their day-to-day recharging options too. So, yes, in addition to recycling batteries, they can also be used as battery storage units separately as well.
Okay. So read any rebates for construction equipment, i.e. backhoes and bobcats or skid steerers?
It's a really great question, Reed. I'm not sure about any rebates for that. My work is focusing mostly right now on road vehicles. So construction equipment or really even like port equipment or farming equipment, anything like that, those are not covered under the policies that I've been working on at the state or federal level. I do know at one point, this was like probably 2013, DNREC had been doing some work on like lawnmowers and things like that. But I don't know the state of that anymore. Yeah, the focus of my work has been on road.
Okay, and then Jeanette, you want to say your question? Any positive news about charging stations in apartment buildings or condominiums? Incentives are needed to convince managers that their charging stations won't cost them a lot because she hopes generous rebates will be a reality.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
would add that
Oh.
I have already discussed this with the management, and they really didn't even want to hear it. They didn't think it was feasible, but they're pretty intensely conservative, put it that way. But I'm not giving up. I think they need to be convinced that this is going to happen and people are going to want to get EVs. We have about 200 parking places here.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that they're not
Yeah.
receptive to that. I think that as more and more folks make this transition and more people request for it, they're business people. So, if they feel that there is a financial incentive for them to offer this, I think that will help to get them more excited about it. The building apartments and condominiums is definitely, it is, as I highlighted, a challenge of something that a lot of folks are thinking about of how we do that. There's been pilot programs around, do utilities own and operate apartment, charging at apartment complexes? Do we instead focus on more like the DC fast charging, like community charging model to help facilitate charging there? There's a lot of things that I think still need to be worked out in that space. But there's a lot of folks actively thinking about that. So I wish I had a better answer on the apartment places, but I'm hoping that that will increase as the market continues to increase and there's a higher demand for those chargers, that the apartment owners and condominium associations will see more of the benefit of providing that service. And I will also say too that one of the things that is popping up more and more is revisions to building codes to help to require charging infrastructure, at least not even necessarily the charger, but like the conduit, and making sure there's there's enough like panel space on the panel, like I'm blanking on what it's called, the switchboard. I'm sorry, it's been a long day.
The breaker panel.
The breaker, thank you. Thank you. Making sure there's
We
enough
already
power.
did that in Newcastle County, and
That's what I was
and
gonna
also
say,
the state did a code.
Yeah, so that's on new buildings. I think, Dee, correct me if I'm wrong if there's
I was
any.
just gonna ask that. It's only for new buildings, right? Not,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes. So, there's still more work to be done on the new build, on the older buildings, but it's a positive step that we'll see that those building codes and having those new infrastructure have those in place, because it is significantly cheaper to install a charging station during construction of a new building than it is, to retrofit it. So, but again, I think as we see more and more drivers be interested in these vehicles, the more these
Yeah,
complexes will realize the
it's
benefits.
very important, especially to me, but
Yeah.
people might want to buy EVs, but they won't, because there's nothing here. You can't run the thing up the elevator to the third floor and plug it in. So it's like, what comes first? But I'm mainly concerned, I think you really have to give them a big carrot, a lot of financial incentive to do it. Like, tell them that the government will pay them to do it or something, or at least make it so that they don't have to put a lot of money up front. And another thing, I was wondering, when you go to charge your car, is that free or do you have to pay? Like, like in a gas station, you have to pay to get gas. It's a dumb question, but
No, not dumb at all. I wish I had a better answer. I mean, the answer really is that it depends. So, Tesla, I hate to use Tesla as an example, but the one thing they've done very, very well is the supercharger network that they built out in terms of across the country, those fast charger stations that you see like Wawa at the Welcome Center. Tesla created that model, and those were all free for drivers when they were utilized. I think now they do charge people to use them, but I should note one of a really positive development in the charging infrastructure space is that now a lot of the car companies are starting to incorporate the Tesla plug, which was proprietary before. So it was kind of like Apple, you could utilize Apple had to have its own like adapters and dongles to connect to anything PC related or Android related. But now the car companies are adopting that standard. So they'll be able to access the supercharger network, probably for a fee. But I think, as Charlie put in the chat, there are shopping malls around the state. I think that the outlets downstate have them available. I think the ones at the Christiana Mall are free too. There's like a bunch of them right by like Cheesecake Factory. I think my mom's charged there. She can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think those are free as well. But yeah, and I know like there's the alternative fuel station locator that I flagged that highlights. I don't think they put the prices there, but there's another resource called PlugShare that's more crowdsourced in terms of where charging infrastructure is. And this one, I'll put it in the chat. People do put in like the price of how it is to charge, or if it is free. So it's really just varies, unfortunately, depending on where you're going to be. A fast charger, I would almost guarantee you're going to have to pay. I think level 2, it's more of a crapshoot whether or not you have to pay or not.
thank you.
And Canby, you had a question back here somewhere. Anne is asking, is there any information on the cost of insurance for EVs versus gas cars?
I don't have any information on that, Anne. It is a good question. I haven't. It's not my area of expertise in terms of like financing of vehicles or insurance. So I unfortunately don't have a great answer to that right now.
Kathy, I have an electric vehicle, Jill, and I don't believe that it's that much higher. It's just mine's a little bit higher than my older vehicles because it's a newer not that it's new, but it's a 2017, but it's newer than some of my vehicles. But I think it's relatively the same. I didn't notice much difference. But your maintenance bills are definitely a lot cheaper every year. They're almost non-existent.
We like to hear that. Carly, your question, is there a preponderance? There is a preponderance, not is there? There is a preponderance of used SUVs on the market. Can we hope for mid-sized vehicles?
I would love
I know
to see that.
there are some, but I'm really looking for more selection than there is. You know, it's
Yeah.
not a competitive market now.
Yeah, you know, and it's been a problem. It's not an electric vehicle problem. Unfortunately, it's just like a vehicle market in general issue, you know, where it seems as though there is and you know, I don't know if it's the automakers pushing for it or just a cultural thing in the United States to have larger vehicles. But it is something that, you know, larger vehicles provide a lot of safety issues, particularly for pedestrians and bicyclists as well. So, you know, it is something that we are acutely aware of trying to figure out ways for to encourage smaller vehicles. We call it like right sizing vehicles, not having them, you know, be EV Hummers everywhere. That's not great. So, you know, I think I was very excited. I was very sad to see that, you know, Chevy a couple of months ago, or GM had announced a couple of months ago, they were taking the Bolt off the market, which is a smaller vehicle. And I was very upset about that because, you know, that is a smaller hatchback style car. And I think that GM heard the outrage of that. And so they actually announced they are going to reproduce that vehicle. I don't think there's a model now. Maybe 2025 is when it'll come back out. But so I do think that there is a really strong desire for those smaller vehicles, as you mentioned, Corley. So I totally agree, and you know, it's something we're trying to figure out. But I think the more people request those vehicles, also is a way for the automakers to hear that people really do still want those smaller cars.
Yeah, that would be nice. There are some huge, enormous cars. Who is this? Mary Peck is asking, does anybody know what DNREC's timetable is? I guess that's to announce about the ACC2. Anybody know the answer to that? Going once, going twice.
I don't have any information on that. I mean, I know that Governor Carney, when he announced the intent to adopt the rule, indicated by the end of this year. But, you know, I haven't heard anything recently from DNREC. And, you know, obviously we had the public hearing and the public comment periods, and now it is at the hands of Secretary Garvin to make that final determination. So hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have a decision. But I don't have any more updates. So hopefully we'll have an answer soon.
Well, and as you know, I mean, there was some folks who really mounted quite a campaign opposing it. So I'm assuming that Governor Carney and Secretary Garvin will listen to the science and not the crazy pushback kind of thing. So fingers crossed.
I hope so. And I'll just say that, you know, I think a lot of the information that came out that it is still coming out, unfortunately, is a lot of misinformation about what the rules do, you know, how they were created, all of that kind of stuff. So I agree, Jill. I hope that we look at the facts as opposed to the misinformation that's out there.
But a lot of people riled up.
Yeah.
Okay. Audrey, did you get your question answered? What size amps electric panel does a home need to support home vehicle charging, or panel upgrades usually needed?
Thank you. Mostly, yeah, our home has a 120 amp panel, and we were curious whether that might need an upgrade.
Okay. And Charlie, you're saying panel upgrades not normally needed for a 50 amp service?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Okay. So Charlie's pushing shopping malls where you can get a free charge. Teasing. Longwood's free, that's cool. Oh, Peggy, you want to talk a little bit about your condo association and putting chargers in?
We
we put in chargers, and Michael Chagas was our leader on this project. And I don't know if Tom Noyes is still on the line, but he could corroborate it. I think that we got 90% rebate on the chargers for our condo. And the labor was not refunded, but the chargers themselves were. So that was a huge help. And then we each paid, those of us who wanted chargers just each paid what our charger would cost, and the ultimate plan is to share with somebody, although we each just have our own right now, but we will eventually share. So, I mean, it's working out really well. It's wonderful to have as someone, I guess Kathy said, you have your gas station in your house.
Okay. So, okay,
Sorry, I
so,
also saw Michael's hand was up, but Mike, I saw you.
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I'm not
just
sure if you saw the question.
Sure. Thanks, Kathy. First, I just want to say great presentation. Really impressed at your command of this subject matter, and really interesting and engaging the way that you presented it. You touched on this, and John mentioned as well about how long the batteries are lasting. And I was just curious because it was one of those things I really didn't really know about and was a bit concerned. But how is there any statistical guidance now about how long ranges will kind of remain within their expected area, what the degradation of a battery's performance is over time?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I I don't think we have any specific data on how long they're lasting right now. But I will say that, we're approaching this almost like second, third generation of electric vehicles at this point. And so we're seeing vehicles with significantly longer ranges, which I think Charlie or John alluded to in the chat as well. So the vehicles themselves have been, getting, I think it's like on average, like 250 or 300 miles per charge now. So want to highlight that too. But the one thing that's important under ACC2, the Advanced Clean Cars 2 policy as well, is that California incorporated some battery durability and warranty standards within that regulation as well. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think it's like, I don't want to say, I can follow up with you later on those exact numbers because I'll butcher them, but they did really take into consideration of wanting to make sure that particularly that vehicle was stronger and durable, especially as it entered the secondary market, to make sure that as it became a used vehicle, that vehicle would still be able to, have a strong battery with a strong range as it went to its secondary user. So that's definitely something that this regulation is also trying to tackle to make sure that those vehicles not only are durable, but do have really strong warranties in place as well to help replace them if they needed to be replaced, if they do get degraded.
thank you. All right, hands, questions? Any more questions? Wow. Thank you. Oh, Dee just put in the chat, lots of fun events this coming Wednesday, 5 to 9 at the Wilmington Brew Works. This is put on by Plastic Free Delaware. And then also the Year of No Waste. And as one who works very hard to have no waste, I can't wait to hear this woman's funny stories because I can imagine. The oil machine film on November 2nd and November 24th, the Black Friday 5K on the C&D Canal. Sounds like fun. So check out D. Durham's plasticfreedelaware.org/events. Coolio. Any last comments, thoughts, questions? Charlie has his hand up. Ted has his hand up.
What do we know about the anti-EV people and their actions against the ACC2?
Sorry, what do you mean? Like where they're funded from?
I've seen
Well-
so many online ads against it lately. It's crazy, like on Facebook and Google search. And they've really been pushing in Delaware against it like recently, the last few weeks.
That's what I meant, yeah. And then probably other states as well. Kathy, you've got a national perspective.
Yeah. So it's our understanding that a lot of these groups and these advertisements and campaigns are being funded from the oil industry. And as I mentioned to Jill, I think a lot of it is there's a lot of fear mongering and misconceptions that are unfortunately being placed out there about what these rules do, what they don't do. But I think it's a lot of oil interests, being scared that they're going to lose profits and their bottom line. So, we're just trying to do our best to combat that misinformation where we can. We've done a lot of op-eds. We did do some advertising around the hearing campaign, but yeah, I've heard unfortunately it ramping up in Delaware in terms of that misinformation campaign. So we're just trying to keep on telling the truth and what these regulations do and all the benefits that Delaware is going to get, because as I highlighted, this transition's occurring whether or not the opponents want it. This is happening, and it's not only just happening in the US, it's happening globally. Like Germany and France are at like 30% electric vehicle sales, and the Chinese market is a huge percentage of EVs too. So this is happening, and it's just a question of, do we as Delaware, as the United States, want to be left behind and have to like catch up with the rest of the world, or do we want to do this right and do it now and provide these benefits as soon as possible? So I don't have a great answer for you, Charlie, but we just have to hold strong and keep on, pushing for the truth of what these regulations do.
So this is a time to lobby people to write Governor, I'll get it in a minute, Carney and Garvin, and just keep plugging and saying, hey, this is the truth, it's happening. This is going to benefit Delaware, both health-wise and, as you say, the ability to plan. So, get out your fingers, and if you've written already, write one more time.
Yeah, and I'll highlight too that Dustin Thompson from the Delaware chapter of the Sierra Club has a lot of really great resources as well. And if folks are interested in keeping tabs on when the rule gets posted, and hopefully an adoption of the rule, and as we think about social media campaigns or anything like that, just let me know and I can connect you with Dustin if you haven't connected with him already. But he has a lot of really great information, and we can help prepare people if folks want to have talking points to rebut.
John, what did you just say here? Tell them they should get the ACC2 fight over before the next legislative session, right? You want to say something, John? You want to pipe in with something? John is the co-chair of the Climate and Energy Committee with the Sierra Club.
Yeah, this is our position. I'm not exactly speaking for everybody. I'm speaking for myself here, but I think we don't want to wait until we're trying to pass lots of other legislation. We have a lot of other things to do, like get an offshore wind procurement process started, and a lot of other bills and things we want to work on during the legislative session. They will just interfere if we let this drag on and on and on. And that's why I think they should do it now. It's sort of it's not a busy time of year that everybody is thinking about politics, and they should just announce it, let people fight a little bit. The holidays will happen. People, just like it'll burn out, they can't stop it. The governor is allowed to just tell Sean Garvin to approve it, and they can't stop that. So that's why I would argue, writing to the governor and saying, let's do this now, pull the Band-Aid off and and let's get it over with so we can get on to the other business we have. We have a lot of other business to do. So it's just my opinion.
But thank you for that, because then, anyway, blah, blah, blah. There's all that legislation about having it,
Why?
be something that's
Sure.
voted on in the legislature. Charlie, do you
They'll
still-
never pass that. They can't pass it,
Well,
the
right, but
Democrats are
it'll
against
make
it,
a
right?
lot of
So-
noise. Ted is waving. You want to say something, Ted? Sorry.
I have just a quick question. If anybody here can give me a Consumer Reports type suggestion, I buy electricity from Delmarva Power. They get their electricity from some other source. And I'm wondering, is there any other of the choices that is more likely to be giving me clean energy?
John, you want to answer that?
As somebody who's, I've been doing this for a couple of years, and I at least can give you I want to give you a caution.
Okay.
So Delmarva allows you to buy energy from third-party providers,
right,
from out of state. And so you have to kind of shop around to decide which one you want to do. But the caution is that they will typically give you a 1-year price. So you have a guaranteed price for 1 year, and then they'll say, and it'll be variable after that. But when I did that, I thought, okay, fine. After that, we'll talk about it. Well, after the year was up, the price quadrupled.
Whoa.
So instead of 8 cents per kilowatt hour, it was 28.
Oh my gosh.
That's just my bad luck, but I didn't notice it for probably about 5 or 6 months because I don't watch everything. I thought, okay, the price is variable. It goes up 10%, it goes up 15%, not 400%. But that I think is pretty typical, that you get a guaranteed 1-year good price, but then you have to sort of take a look again and make sure that you know what's happening. And so I'm getting ready to have to look again, see what are the current prices, and see, is this the company do I want to stay with them, or do I want to find another company for the next year, at least until community solar becomes a choice. So that's just a little bit of caution.
Yeah, I was aware that seemed to be what was going on. I was just thinking, maybe with all these people here, somebody has found out that over the years, Sharon has her hand up.
Go, Sharon.
I do. I've had Clean Choice.
Okay.
Delmarva Power. I've had them now, I bet, at least maybe 6 years. Shoot, you give me your email address, I'll send you my bills from Delmarva. I've been very happy with them. Very happy with them.
Happy with them. Okay.
Very happy. And the only negative part that I have to say about them is I actually had to unplug my landline telephone line because I was barraged constantly for years and years and years with people trying to get me to change over to their
one
cheap fossil fuel shit. And quite honestly, I got to the point where I'm so pissed off. I would email and actually get back at the salespeople that were hired to do this. I mean, it got bad. It got bad. So I actually unplugged my landline, to be honest with you. But I would highly recommend Clean Choice. And I've told people, I don't think I'm paying, I could probably, I don't know if I could find a bill right now or not, but the bottom line is, would I pay a little more? Absolutely. Am I paying a lot more? Absolutely not. I'm not. I'm not, and I know I'm not. So,
that's interesting.
I highly recommend them. Yes. And there's
I know
18, there's like 18 of these companies that actually can sell us crap through Delmarva Power.
Right.
That's
That's a
incredible.
large number. Right.
It
That's right.
is, it is.
Now,
And-
there's an electric co-op. Now, there's an electric co-op, and I'm wondering, does it sound like
Well,
they would
well,
be?
I don't have the opportunity.
You don't know that.
I can't tap into that electric co-op.
see.
I don't have
Okay.
that. I can only have Delmarva Power. But
Did
I'll
you,
tell you
did
what,
you have
they're
hand up?
100% both solar and wind. They've got no fossil fuel to them, and
Sounds interesting. Mhm.
yes. And you know, and I've fought the bullshitters for at least 6 years that have been trying to hook me up with their coal, you know. So
Oh my.
I'm pissed. That's all I have to say.
A vote for clean choice.
Yes.
Thank
That
you.
was your voice.
Everybody can just
Yeah.
check who they have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I will,
Did you have your hand up, Mike?
yeah, just to share a couple thoughts on this. You know, one, what Sharon is doing, what others are doing is great, because you are directly supporting producers like the solar producers that are out there, the onshore wind, things like that. And the second thought on this is that, to your point, Sharon, when you're paying for cheap fossil fuels, you aren't paying the full cost of consuming that fuel. The cost of paying for the disasters that come out of climate change and things like that really are a part of that, as well as along with human health, et cetera. But my last point on this is that how electricity is billed versus how the electrons are actually consumed are two very different things. The electrons, the way that it's billed is dependent upon the power purchase agreements that DP&L has with a number of different providers. But the electrons do tend to be consumed very close to where they're delivered. So when US Wind and Ørsted's projects are connected to the grid here in Sussex County, the reality is that those electrons are going to be consumed close to home. So even though Maryland ratepayers are effectively paying for that energy, you know, in a couple of years, when you turn on your lights, it's going to be wind power that's powering those most of the time. So you'll get some of that just through the way it works. But I don't want to discount what Sharon is doing, because that's really supporting the industry as well. And that's very important.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good.
Coralie has her hand up. I'm not seeing her on my screen.
Well, I did have my hand up. At first I was going to comment, I think, to Charlie's question on, you know, the who's pushing all the lies. It very clearly goes back to the Cesar Rodney Institute, because I went to some of their informational seminars, and we know who the people who are running it are connected with. I was interested in.
Did you put seminars, their information in air quotes, please?
Yes, I'm not up, so I can't do that. You do it for me. I'm also interested in Sharon's experience. I've gotten a lot of email from Clean Choice, and I was turned off about some things that it was a kind of hard sell, and I think they were behind some things that I don't think were legitimate ways to get customers. And I did know somebody I thought was with them at Clean Choice in the Sierra Club, that, you know, the prices she listed were considerably higher than we were paying, but that may have changed. So I guess I need to talk to Sharon. So, and we talk, so.
Coralie, I think I actually get an emailed bill now. I'd be happy to forward it, so you can see.
I
what
can
I'm
tell you,
paying.
Yeah, what I
Clean
need
Choice.
is comparisons. I have an all electric house.
Oh,
And
It's
this
15 cents. I can tell you,
very
it's
important
15
choice.
cents a kilowatt hour. So that's more than, Delmarva's fossil fuel rate, but I don't mind paying that. You know, it's more, but I think when community solar comes along, I think we're going to see a big drop in the cost. And I think there's going to be some consumer protections involved when the community solar stuff kicks in maybe a year or so.
Yeah,
So I'm kind of holding on till then, because I think we're going to get some real benefits when that local power, with Delaware rules, is available.
Yeah, I've been attending, almost all of the seminars that Senator Hansen is running, and the process is fascinating. I couldn't can't believe the complexity of some of the questions, but yeah, I've been holding my breath to get onto community solar.
I'm just aware of Kathy's valuable time. I heard her say she's had a long day. And if we have any other questions for Kathy, you know, jump in now, or I will say thank you, thank you, thank you. It is, we have all these Delaware connections, and it's just so fun that everybody else knows you, but I know you through your mother. So, any other last minute questions for Kathy? And Dee, I don't know how long we have this. If we want to say thank you to Kathy, if we want to stay on here and chat anymore and talk about whatever it was, clean choice or whatever, we could do that. But once again, Kathy, you're a star, and thank you for doing what you do. And I think everybody will write to Garvin and Carney and remind them, as John says, to get this done. I thought it was before the first of the year, but who knows? Anyway.
Well, yeah, technically it is before the first of the year, but I think to John's point, the sooner an announcement can happen, the better. So
it's a good talking point. It's a good talking point.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's good to see everybody.
Thank you very much.
Kathy.
So much.
Okay.
Lots of applause. There we go.
How about I turn off the recording?
Oh, good idea.